What will win in a drag race between a Bugatti Chiron Supersport and a Koenigsegg Jesko? Well, I'm going to find out by racing them over the standing quarter mile.
We need to do a mile. Yeah. Whole mile. Yeah. Next time. That's good. I love it. And there you have it. The Bugatti is faster than the Koenigsegg Regera. Who would have?
One of these hypercar companies has changed corporate owners 3 times in under 30 years. Volkswagen, then a Rimac-Porsche joint venture, now heading toward full independence. The other has never been bought, sold, or merged with anyone. Not once, since a 22-year-old sketched it in Microsoft Paint in 1994. One builds its engines with a Volkswagen-sized budget behind it. The other reinvented the camshaft itself because nobody else would. And right now, a wrecked Bugatti Chiron sitting in Matt Armstrong's garage is showing exactly what that difference actually means for an owner. Let's discuss 2 completely different hypercar philosophies, and the one wreck that put both on display. The day 2 hypercar legends were born. Bugatti's story begins in 1909, in the French town of Molsheim, when Ettore Bugatti, born into an artistic Italian family, trained as much in aesthetics as engineering.
Ettore was born into a Milanese family of artists.
The automotive world completely different.
At 20, Ettore built his first automobile and quickly gained the attention of a car manufacturer.
Set up a factory built around a single conviction, that a car could be a work of art and a machine of precision at the same time. That philosophy produced some of the most celebrated automobiles of the early 20th century. And it's the same philosophy Bugatti still leans on in its marketing more than 100 years later. Koenigsegg's origin story couldn't look more different. In 1994, a 22-year-old Swede named Christian von Koenigsegg, with no engineering degree, no automotive background, and no serious funding, decided he was going to build the world's best supercar anyway. The inspiration wasn't inherited family craftsmanship. It was a Norwegian animated film he'd watched as a child about a bicycle repairman who builds his own race car. Koenigsegg financed the earliest years partly with $200,000 from a Swedish technical development board, and partly with his own father's investment, sustained over several years before the company produced anything resembling a finished product. Where Bugatti inherited over a century of brand mythology, Koenigsegg had to invent its own from nothing, in a country nobody associated with hypercars. Where Ettore Bugatti built his factory in an established European industrial town, Christian von Koenigsegg eventually moved production into a decommissioned Swedish Air Force base after a fire destroyed his original facility in 2003. And kept the base's fighter squadron nickname alive as part of the company's identity, rather than erasing it. The fire itself is worth pausing on, because it's the kind of setback that ends most small manufacturers permanently. Koenigsegg had barely established itself when the blaze tore through its original production facility, destroying tooling, prototypes, and years of accumulated development work in a single night. A company backed by a major shareholder group might have simply written off the loss and folded the project. Koenigsegg, with no parent company to absorb the hit, relocated to the former airbase and kept building. A decision that, in hindsight, set the tone for how the company has handled every setback since. Absorb it, rebuild, and keep going without waiting for anyone else's approval to do so. 2 founders, working roughly 85 years apart, arrived at the same basic ambition: build the most extreme car in the world, from almost opposite starting points. One had history and craftsmanship to lean on. The other had nothing but conviction and a sketchbook. That gap in origin story turns out to explain almost everything about how differently the 2 companies are run today. It's worth dwelling on just how different those 2 founding moments actually looked in practice. Ettore Bugatti was operating within an established European industrial and artistic tradition. His own father was a celebrated furniture and jewelry designer, and Ettore grew up steeped in the idea that engineering and aesthetics
Ettore Bugatti was a designer and an engineer in certain capacities that did work for a lot of companies on a freelance basis.
weren't separate disciplines but two expressions of the same instinct. That background shaped a company culture obsessed with elegance as much as raw performance from its very first cars. Koenigsegg had none of that inheritance to draw on. Christian studied economics and business administration in school, not engineering, and taught himself the rest through what he's described as relentless self-education and hands-on experimentation. Where Bugatti's founding culture said craftsmanship comes first, Koenigsegg's founding culture said, figure it out yourself, because nobody is going to hand you the answer. The ownership battle behind two hypercar legends. Bugatti's modern era began in 1998 when Volkswagen Group acquired the dormant brand and rebuilt it from scratch, eventually producing the Veyron and then the Chiron under full corporate ownership. That arrangement lasted over 2 decades, until November of 2021, when Volkswagen restructured Bugatti into a new joint venture called Bugatti Rimac, splitting ownership between Porsche AG and Mate Rimac's Croatian electric hypercar company, Rimac Group. That structure has kept shifting. As of April of 2026, Porsche signed agreements to sell its entire 45% stake in Bugatti Rimac to an investment consortium led by HOF Capital, a deal expected to close before the end of the year. Once it does, Bugatti's ownership ties to the Volkswagen Group, which have existed in some form since 1998, will end for the first time in nearly 3 decades. Bugatti isn't being run by a single, stable owner. It's being run by whichever combination of corporate and venture capital shareholders currently holds the majority stake, with the structure itself changing every few years. Koenigsegg has had almost the opposite 3 decades. Christian von Koenigsegg still owns and runs the company he founded in 1994, with his wife Haldora serving as chief operating officer since 2000. The company has come close to major corporate entanglement exactly once: a high-profile 2009 agreement to acquire Saab Automobile from General Motors, which collapsed over financing before it could close. Since then, Koenigsegg has never been bought, sold, or merged with another manufacturer. Every major engineering decision at the company still runs through its founder directly. The scale difference between the two companies today.
The Bugatti Chiron Supersport has an 8-litre quad-turbo W16 engine with 1,600 horsepower. The Koenigsegg Jesko Absolute has a 5-litre twin-turbo V8. It produces 1,600 horsepower.
Is significant enough to shape almost everything else about how they operate. Koenigsegg's total workforce sits somewhere in the range of 700 to 800 people worldwide, building a low hundreds annual production run of vehicles that are frequently customized individually to each buyer's specification. Bugatti Rimac, backed at various points by Volkswagen, Porsche, and now an incoming venture capital consortium, has always operated with access to a dramatically larger pool of engineering talent, supplier relationships, and regulatory infrastructure than Koenigsegg could realistically build on its own. The trade-off being that access comes bundled with layers of corporate decision-making that a founder-owned company simply doesn't have to navigate. It's worth asking what that structural difference actually means for a customer. At Bugatti, an owner is buying into a brand whose direction is set by a rotating cast of corporate shareholders with their own competing priorities. At Koenigsegg, an owner is buying into one person's specific, singular vision of what a hypercar should be, for better and for worse, depending on how much you value stability versus continuity of vision. There's a telling detail buried in Koenigsegg's one brush with major corporate entanglement, too. The collapsed 2009 Saab deal wasn't Koenigsegg trying to get bought, it was Koenigsegg trying to become the buyer, attempting to acquire an entire General Motors-owned brand, despite being, at the time, a company that had built only a handful of cars a year. The deal fell apart over financing, not appetite. It's a small window into how differently the two companies think about scale. Bugatti has spent nearly 3 decades being acquired by larger and larger entities, while Koenigsegg's one real flirtation with a corporate deal was an attempt to go the other direction entirely. Bugatti's scale versus Koenigsegg's obsession. Bugatti's engineering legacy is built on scale. The 8-liter, 16-cylinder W16 engine that powered both the Veyron and the Chiron.
I think what I like about this car is that it's a really great finale to that 8-litre W16 engine, because in this it actually feels even more like old school traditional internal combustion engine just because of the noises that you're experiencing.
Was an extraordinary feat of packaging and brute force output, but it was developed with the resources of a Volkswagen-backed engineering budget behind it, drawing on componentry and expertise from across the wider automotive group. The brand's newest model, the Tourbillon, unveiled under mate Rimac's direction, shifts that formula entirely, pairing a naturally aspirated V16 with a hybrid electric powertrain producing a combined output north of 1,800 horsepower, blending Bugatti's combustion heritage with Rimac's electric expertise. The Tourbillon is itself a useful window into how ownership shapes engineering philosophy. Under pure Volkswagen ownership, Bugatti's next model would likely have drawn primarily on group componentry and group electrification strategy. Under the Rimac-led joint venture, the Tourbillon instead borrows heavily from Rimac's own background in electric hypercars, the Nevera among them, meaning the character of Bugatti's newest flagship shifted almost overnight based on which company happened to hold the controlling stake at the moment the car was designed. That's not a knock on the result. Early reception to the Tourbillon has been strongly positive. It's simply a demonstration of how directly ownership structure translates into engineering direction at a company like this. Koenigsegg took the opposite path from day one. Build almost everything in-house, rather than sourcing it from a larger parent company's parts bin. The company's signature achievement is FreeValve, a camless engine technology Christian von Koenigsegg personally holds patents on, which removes the traditional camshaft entirely and allows each intake and exhaust valve to be controlled independently. A level of tuning flexibility conventional engines simply can't match. Koenigsegg paired that with its own light-speed transmission and, in the Regera, a direct drive system that eliminates the traditional gearbox altogether. That level of vertical integration is genuinely unusual in an industry where even the largest manufacturers routinely outsource transmissions, electronics, and subsystems to third-party suppliers. Koenigsegg's small size, ironically, is part of what forces this approach. Without a parent conglomerate to draw parts and engineering resources from, building everything themselves was often the only way to get exactly the component they wanted. The FreeValve story in particular captures the difference in philosophy well. Removing a car engine's camshaft sounds like a small mechanical detail, but the camshaft has governed how internal combustion engines breathe for well over a century. It's about as fundamental to conventional engine design as the wheel is to a car. Christian von Koenigsegg's team spent years developing a system that replaces it with individually controlled pneumatic actuators for every valve, allowing the engine's breathing characteristics to be reprogrammed almost like software rather than fixed by the physical shape of a camshaft lobe. A company the size of Volkswagen has the resources to fund dozens of parallel engineering projects like that, and let most of them quietly fail. Koenigsegg, with a fraction of the headcount and budget, had to make FreeValve work, because there wasn't a backup plan sitting in a different division. Two completely different answers to the same question. How do you build the most extreme car possible? Bugatti's answer, both historically and under Rimac, has consistently been to combine the best available technology and resources, wherever they come from. Koenigsegg's answer has been to reinvent the component yourself.
So even though there are a lot of components, it's much less than you would normally need to get this type of functionality.
If the existing version isn't good enough. A philosophy that only really works when one person is small enough and stubborn enough to insist on it. The speed war, nobody expected. For years, Bugatti held the psychological high ground in the top speed conversation, with the Chiron Supersport 300 Plus becoming, in 2019, the first production car verified past 300 miles per hour. It was a genuine engineering milestone, achieved with Volkswagen Group resources and a closed test track. Koenigsegg answered from the other direction. The Agera RS set the two-way average top speed record for a production car at 277 and 0.8 miles per hour back in 2017.
The Agera RS, and here we go about and take it again, and we polish the numbers really amazing.
A record achieved not on a closed track built for the purpose, but on a closed public highway in Nevada, using a road-legal car with essentially no special preparation beyond what any customer could order. More recently, the Jesko Absolute set a 0 to 400 kilometers per hour and back to zero world record of 27 and 83 seconds at Örebro Airfield in Sweden in June of 2024, shaving nearly a full second off the previous record set by Koenigsegg's own Regera the year before. The pattern that emerges from the record books is telling. Bugatti's headline achievements tend to require the backing of a major manufacturer's testing infrastructure and budget. Koenigsegg's records have repeatedly come from a company that, even now, employs somewhere around 700 to 800 people worldwide, a fraction of the engineering workforce available to a Volkswagen or Porsche-backed operation, beating out competitors with vastly more corporate muscle behind them. Neither company's numbers make the others irrelevant, but the record books do suggest that raw resources and out-and-out performance aren't quite the same thing in this segment, and that Koenigsegg's independence hasn't cost it the one metric hypercar buyers ultimately care most about. It's also worth noting how differently the two companies approach the record setting itself, which says almost as much as the numbers do. Bugatti's 300-mile-per-hour Chiron run was conducted with a modified test car, a heavily prepared closed track in Germany.
Bugatti announced that one of its cars, a modified $3 million Chiron, was clocked at over 300 miles per hour on a test track in Germany.
And a level of institutional support that included Volkswagen Group engineers well beyond Bugatti's own staff. Koenigsegg's Agera RS record, by contrast, was set on a stretch of closed public highway outside Las Vegas, in a car built to the same specification any paying customer could order. No factory-only modifications. No special one-off test mule. For a company that size, choosing to prove its speed claims using an essentially ordinary production car on a public road rather than a purpose-built facility was itself a statement about how confident Koenigsegg was in engineering it could stand behind without asterisks. Why Armstrong hit a wall with Bugatti. All of this history sets up exactly the situation Matt Armstrong found himself in. His Bugatti Chiron Per Sport needed parts and support that only Bugatti itself could authorize. And for months, that authorization simply didn't come.
Something is seriously broken. We need a part from Bugatti, and no matter how many times I've tried to call them, they will not answer the phone.
Tied up in VIN lock restrictions and a corporate parts process that treated an independent repair shop's request the same way it would treat any unauthorized third parties. That's not a random customer service failure. It's a direct product of the ownership structure described above. a brand controlled by a shifting coalition of corporate shareholders, where a single independent repair request has to move through layers of policy, legal risk assessment, and brand protection concerns before anyone with actual authority signs off on it. Nobody at Bugatti Rimac is deliberately trying to make Armstrong's life difficult. The friction is simply what happens when the company's structure prioritizes centralized control over individual flexibility. It's worth asking, honestly, whether a Koenigsegg owner in the same situation would face the identical wall. There's no guarantee they wouldn't. Koenigsegg is still a manufacturer, protecting its own intellectual property and safety standards. But the company's entire operating philosophy, built around a founder who is still personally involved in engineering decisions and a customer base numbering in the dozens of cars per year rather than hundreds, points toward a fundamentally more direct relationship between company and owner than a joint venture answering to multiple shareholders can easily replicate. There's also a practical scale argument worth naming plainly. Koenigsegg builds so few cars each year that Christian von Koenigsegg.
I'm very excited to show you all the pre-production Koenigsegg Jesko. This is a validation car that we built according to the principle of the production line.
Reportedly still knows many of his customers personally, sometimes fielding questions directly rather than routing them through layers of customer service. Bugatti Rimac, even accounting for its own relatively low production numbers compared to a mainstream automaker, sits inside a corporate governance structure where a repair authorization for one customer's car has to satisfy legal, safety, and brand protection review processes designed to work consistently across a much larger and more complex ownership base spread across multiple countries. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but they produce very different experiences the one time something actually goes wrong. This isn't a case of one company being good and the other being bad. It's a case of two structurally different companies producing two structurally different ownership experiences. And Armstrong's stalled Chiron happened to land squarely inside the exact friction point that Bugatti's corporate structure makes almost inevitable. It's also worth acknowledging what Bugatti's structure gets right in exchange for that friction. A company with Volkswagen and Porsche level backing behind it, even in a joint venture arrangement, can fund crash safety programs, emissions compliance across dozens of markets, and long-term parts availability in a way a company Koenigsegg's size genuinely struggles to match at scale. Owning a car from a company with deep corporate pockets behind it usually means better odds the manufacturer will still exist, in some form, decades from now to support it. The same institutional weight that slowed Armstrong's repair down is also what keeps Bugatti's warranty and parts network functioning globally, year after year, regardless of any single executive's personal involvement. There's a real trade-off buried in all of this, not just a simple verdict in either direction. Hypercar ownership becomes a power struggle. Step back from the individual saga, and the wrecked Chiron becomes something closer to a case study than a single unfortunate incident. It shows exactly what happens when a hypercar brand's ownership structure gets prioritized over an individual owner's needs, not through malice, but through the sheer organizational weight of a company that answers to shareholders, legal departments, and brand protection policies before it answers to the person who actually bought the car. Koenigsegg's smaller scale isn't just a marketing talking point about exclusivity. It's a structural choice that keeps decision-making close to the person who founded the company in the first place.
Please welcome CEO and founder of Christian Koenigsegg.
I'm 22 years old. I had started my first company when I was 19.
For better and for worse. Slower to scale, more vulnerable to a single bad year, but also far less likely to leave an owner stuck for months, waiting on a corporate parts authorization process with no single person accountable for the delay. Bugatti, for its part, is heading toward its own version of independence. The Rimac deal, once it closes, hands day-to-day control to a much smaller, founder-led company than the Volkswagen Group ever was. Whether that actually changes how the brand treats owners like Armstrong going forward is still an open question, one the industry will be watching closely as the transition plays out over the rest of this year. What's clear already is that the incoming ownership group has every commercial incentive to close that gap. A brand's reputation among the exact kind of high-profile owners and independent shops that generate this level of public attention is worth more to a smaller, venture-backed operator than it ever was to a division buried inside a sprawling automotive conglomerate, with dozens of other brands competing for the same executive's attention. Whether that commercial incentive actually translates into faster parts authorizations and fewer VIN-locked garages remains to be seen. But it's at least a more direct line of accountability than the arrangement Armstrong has been dealing with so far. Two founders, 85 years apart. Two ownership structures, built on opposite philosophies. And one wrecked hypercar sitting in a garage, waiting on a decision that, depending entirely on which of these two companies had built it, might already have been made. It's tempting to reduce this entirely to a good guy, bad guy story, but the more honest read is that both companies are simply optimized for different things, and neither optimization is free. Bugatti built an organization capable of surviving multiple ownership changes across a century, weathering bankruptcies, world wars, and corporate restructurings that would have ended a smaller operation outright. Resilience that comes precisely from not depending on any single person's continued involvement. Koenigsegg built an organization capable of moving fast, taking engineering risks a larger company's legal and financial departments would likely veto, and treating every customer relationship as personal, rather than procedural. Flexibility that comes precisely from staying small enough for one person to still be reachable. Armstrong's garage just happens to be where those two philosophies collided most visibly. This year, whichever direction Bugatti's ownership eventually settles into once the current transition closes, it's unlikely to fundamentally resolve this tension. A founder-led venture capital consortium is still, structurally, a group of shareholders with competing interests to balance, closer to Koenigsegg's model than Volkswagen's corporate bureaucracy, certainly, but still a long way from a single person personally signing off on a parts request. The gap between these two companies isn't really about who currently owns them. It's about how many layers of approval sit between an owner with a broken car and the person who can actually authorize fixing it. And on that measure, the two companies remain about as far apart as they've ever been. And that's what makes the Bugatti versus Koenigsegg story so fascinating. One was built on more than a century of heritage, craftsmanship, and corporate power. The other came from one founder's obsession, risk, and refusal to follow the conventional path. Today, those philosophies still shape their engineering, performance, ownership experience, and future direction. The wrecked Chiron exposed the frustrations that can come with Bugatti's structure, while Koenigsegg represents a radically different approach. Neither formula is perfect. One chose scale and legacy, the other chose independence and control. But which approach would you choose? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more incredible automotive stories.